For today's video, I want to talk about some easy category aquarium plants that are often recommended to beginners but can be more troublesome than expected. The idea for this video actually came from a comment someone left on one of my other videos, and I thought it was a great topic to explore to try and help other people avoid these problems in their own tanks. Everything I'm sharing is based on my personal experience with these plants, and I'll also be explaining why I think these issues tend to happen, as well as how you can try and avoid them in certain situations. So first up we have Java Fern, which is one of the most commonly recommended plants in the aquarium hobby, and until recently I often recommended it to beginners too. Now this plant can be very easy to grow, but only under the right conditions. Before we dive into the bigger issue with Java Fern, I just want to quickly address a very common beginner mistake. Java Fern is a rhizome plant, which means it needs to be attached to hardscape or placed in an area of your aquarium where the actual rhizome isn't buried in the substrate. And if you don't know, the rhizome is basically a horizontally grown stalk that is green. It's pretty obvious when you actually see one, and then the leaves will come out vertical from there. But the point is, if the rhizome gets submerged in your substrate, it can cause the plant to rot and melt away surprisingly quickly. Now that's not the main issue with Java Fern, because a lot of the Java Ferns that are sold in stores are grown immersed, as in their out of water form. This makes a lot of sense for the plant nurseries because it lets them grow the plant quicker because of the access to the CO2 in the atmospheric air, making it quick and easy to grow a lot of plants and get them ready to ship. However, when you place these immersed grown plants into a fully submerged aquarium, they often go through a melt stage. This means that the original leaves start to deteriorate and melt away, and then the plant will often grow new submerged leaves and adapt to its new environment. In my personal experience, the regular Java Fern is in Microsorum terapis, and Java Fern Latifolia are the two hardiest varieties that I've personally kept and tend to have the best odds of survival. On the other hand, varieties like Narrow Leaf, Trident and Winterlove Java Fern seem to be far more prone to severe melting in my tanks. Now there's a few theories out there on why this happens, and a lot of people point to water parameters, suggesting that the water is either too hard or too soft, but Java Fern is actually native to a huge area across South and Southeast Asia, so it naturally tolerates a wide range of conditions. My personal theory, and I can't stress that enough, it is just a theory, is that it's some kind of CO2 shock kicking in the plant, where the available CO2 from atmospheric oxygen is essentially removed, and the plant has to quickly regrow submerged leaves that are used to less CO2. Another popular problem that I've seen people report, and I used to think this was the case as well, is that it's due to glue getting onto the rhizome of the plant when you attach it to hardscape, but I have recently had some Trident Fern start to melt back when it was attached to the hardscape with thread. So unfortunately, I don't have a definitive answer on what actually causes this one, but if you do add Java Fern to your tank because it's labelled as an easy category plant, then see it melt, just know that it is a very common thing. Thankfully, the plant will usually sprout new, healthy submerged growth and bounce back, but Java Fern is kind of a slow grower, so it might take a while. If you are looking for better survival odds, I'd recommend you try Java Fern, commonly sold as Microsorum terapis, its Latin name, or Java Fern Latifolia if you can find it in your area, because they've been very reliable in my tanks. Next up is Anubias petite, and I keep a wide variety of Anubias in my tanks, and across the board, including Anubias petite, I honestly think they're an excellent choice, especially for beginners, and they are great for new planted tanks. Just like Java Fern, Anubias is also a rhizome plant, so make sure to mount it on your hardscape or keep it somewhere so the rhizome is not submerged in your substrate. But in my experience, Anubias petite and to some extent Anubias nana can be a little bit more sensitive to ammonia spikes, which can cause them to start to melt. My personal theory is that this sensitivity is due to Anubias petite being a man-made cultivar rather than a naturally occurring plant that's had to evolve in the wild and tough it out to prove itself. That said, I really do think most people should be able to grow Anubias petite in their tank without issue, and it really is an excellent plant. My advice would be to do regular partial water changes during the initial cycle of your tank to help manage the ammonia levels, or just add the Anubias petite to your tank once it's cycled and ammonia is under control to prevent the melt. Next up we have red root floaters, and as the name suggests, this is a floating plant that sits on the surface of your aquarium and is often treated as a low maintenance, just drop it in and leave it to grow kind of plant. The water splashes from my sponge filter in my old betta fish tank setup was actually enough to cause a lot of my red root floaters to melt away because the water just caused problems with the leaves. Now, using floating plant rings like this one that I have with Amazon Frogbit in it can be a great way to avoid this issue, as it lets you control where the plants sit in your tank so they don't get splashed or submerged by your filter. One of the main reasons people choose red root floaters is for their beautiful red coloration, which can look absolutely stunning in the right conditions. The problem is that a lot of people struggle to get their red root floaters to turn red because there's a few different variables at play here. Just to be completely honest, I never managed to get mine to turn red, but that was back when I first got back into the hobby and that wasn't really a goal of mine. But I do want to give them another try in the future just to see if I can get them to turn red in my own aquariums. If your goal is to get the plant to turn its beautiful red colour, then I highly recommend checking out this blog post that I link in the description from 2 Hour Aquarist, where they do an excellent job of breaking everything down and show some beautiful photos of what this plant can look like if it reaches its full potential. In short though, it does seem that the red coloration with this plant is due to low nitrogen levels in the tank, triggering a stress response in the leaves that make the leaves and roots turn red. Next up is Eliocharis acicularis, and this plant is a little different from the other ones in this list because it doesn't actually melt or have nutritional issues or anything like that, but in my experience it just doesn't grow. Both the Tropica and Denali plant nurseries list this plant as being able to reach a height of 15 centimeters, which is around 6 inches in optimal conditions. But in every tank I've tried it in, it stays the exact same height as when I planted it in the tank out of the 1-2 grow cup. It's also a stolon plant, meaning that it should be able to spread out via runners, but mine never did, not once, and it just kind of sat there alive. It didn't melt, but it didn't grow either, it just kind of chills and does nothing. Now, there are some other types of Eliocharis that I've had decent success with in the exact same water parameters and in some cases the exact same tank without issue, and they do grow just slower. For example, Eliocharis parvula is a great little plant for the foreground, and it's usually recommended as a low-tech carpeting plant, and while it does take a long time to start carpeting, it does work. I've also kept Eliocharis persillea as well, which is a more difficult variant to keep, and it's usually recommended under moderate intensity light, but again, after a couple of months it started to send out the runners and grow. Unfortunately though, the Eliocharis acicularis version just doesn't do anything in my tanks. It doesn't melt, so you do get the green, but I just don't see the point in buying a plant if it's not going to do anything. Next up are cryptocorenes, which are easily one of the most popular plant groups in the aquarium hobby, especially amongst people new to the planted tank side of things. But, like I mentioned earlier with Java Fern, a lot of aquarium plants, including cryptocorenes, are grown out of water in their immersed grown form, and this can cause issues when you submerge them. Just like with Java Fern, with crypts, a lot of their leaves will start to melt away and then healthy new submerged growth will start to appear, usually within a couple of weeks. By complete chance, I actually have some crypts going through this exact stage right now in my betta fish tank, and you can see that the older leaves from these cryptocorenes are starting to form holes and melt away. And then you have the new darker green leaves coming through without holes, and these are the newer submerged form leaves. Now, you will often see a lot of conflicting advice with cryptocorenes online, with some people saying that crypts melted in their tanks, while others will counterpost saying that that particular crypt was completely fine in their tank, but there is a reason for this. In my opinion, this is because cryptocorene is an absolutely huge genus with a lot of species and varieties within it, and it covers a huge area across South and Southeast Asia where water parameters can vary greatly. So a lot of the meltback will depend on the specific type of cryptocorin that you are keeping and your local water chemistry, often decided by your tap water's hardness. For example, here in Europe, Cryptocorin wentii is probably the most commonly kept species of cryptocorin in the hobby. This one is native to Sri Lanka, where rivers are often fed by hard mineral-rich groundwater, so it's probably going to do better in hard water aquariums. On the other hand, Cryptocorin affinis, which is a relatively popular crypt here, is native to Thailand and Malaysia, where their natural water is far softer. Due to this particular variant of cryptocorin will probably do better in soft water aquariums and may have reduced melt there. But like I mentioned with Java Fern, I do think the drastic change in CO2 availability is one of the reasons that causes crypts and Java Fern and a lot of other plants to melt and then regrow new leaves. So if you have recently added some cryptocorins to your aquarium and they're starting to melt, don't panic. This is common and usually a temporary phase, and within a couple of weeks or maybe a month or two you should start to see new healthy submerged growth coming through. Next up is Echinodorus rennie, which is a popular dwarf sword plant that's very popular due to its red coloration. I'm currently not keeping any of this in any of my tanks, so here's some B-roll of my fish instead, but it is definitely one of the more challenging easy category plants that I've tried. I've attempted to grow this twice now, and both times it ended up failing. The first time was in a low light setup and the plant quickly melted away and never returned, unfortunately. This second attempt was under moderate light intensity and it did last a little bit longer, but it did struggle from the beginning, and then over a couple of months it just started to melt away with more and more leaves failing on the plant. Both of these tanks had a pH of 6.4 and a general hardness of 4, but I'm not sure if that actually played a role in the plant melting or not, if I'm honest. Similar to Anubias petite, which I mentioned earlier in the video, Echinodorus rennie is a man-made cultivar that's developed in a lab rather than naturally occurring in the wild and having to evolve in a competitive environment, making it as hardy as possible. So unfortunately, I really can't say why I've struggled with this plant, but personally I do lean more towards it being a cultivar rather than a natural plant, but it's definitely one of the more difficult plants that's marked up as being easy category that I've personally tried. Next up is hornwort, and I totally understand why so many people say this is a very easy plant to keep, while a lot of other people say it's very difficult. I don't actually have any hornwort in my tanks right now, but I have tried it in various aquariums and quarantine setups over the years. In my personal opinion, the biggest issue with hornwort is that unlike most aquarium plants in the hobby which are sold under their specific species or variety names, hornwort is almost always just labelled as hornwort. The problem with this is that there's estimated to be between 150 and 300 different varieties of hornwort out there, with each one having evolved under different water conditions, and it's pretty much a global plant depending on the specific variety we'll look at. So when you buy a plant called hornwort, you really are rolling the dice on which version of it you actually get. And like a lot of other people, I just source mine from independent sellers on eBay who don't know which variety they have either, because a lot of the local aquarium shops in my area don't carry it. Now the specific problem that I have with hornwort grown in my tanks is that usually it will just grow and grow and grow, and it does a great job, and then all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, it just drops all of its needles and starts melting. As I mentioned, the frustrating part is it's difficult to research it because you don't actually know the specific type of hornwort you have, so basically it's just something a lot of people have to accept. That said, I do want to give hornwort another shot in the future, as it really is an excellent plant for natural water purification and it has a lot of potential in the right setup. But next time I'm definitely putting the extra time and effort into trying to find someone who sells the one from the Denelay plant nursery, so I know I'm getting their version of the plant that they label up as being easy to keep. Next up is Ludwigia, and right now at the time of recording I'm keeping two different varieties, which are Ludwigia Mini Super Red and Ludwigia Palusterus Green, and both of them have the exact same issue. In my experience, Ludwigia is actually very easy to grow, and it tends to do very well when first added to an aquarium. But as the plant starts to grow taller, the tops of the stems can block light from reaching the lower portions. Over time, this seems to cause the leaves at the lower areas of the stem to start melting away from the plant. In my 40-gallon tank, for example, you can see my Ludwigia Mini Super Red is looking good until you get to the bottom of the stems where all of the leaves have just melted away from it and it can look messy. Eventually, the lower part of the stem starts to deteriorate to a level where it will just break and the healthy part of the plant detaches and starts floating around in your tank. One potential workaround is to remove the plant every month or so from your tank and trim the healthy tops off and then replant it back into your tank. And I know this may seem like a lot of effort, but some aquascapers do actually do this with stem plants every month. I also know several people who keep these two exact types of Ludwigia in the same water parameters I have in high-tech tanks with strong lighting and CO2 injection, and the issue doesn't seem to appear in high-tech tanks. But in my experience with low-tech tanks, this is an issue, and it's not really something that ruins the plant for you. It just gets ugly and does need a little bit more maintenance, so I wanted to make people aware of it. Next up is Limnophila sessiliflora, and while this is pretty easy to grow with low powered lights and it's very easy with moderate intensity lights, the issue is that it's just too good at what it does. By that I mean that it grows at such a rapid pace that it can dominate the available space and rapidly consume all of the nutrients in the tank and eventually start starving both itself and the other plants in the aquarium. If you want to keep Limnophila sessiliflora in a small nano tank like I have in this 30 litre or 8 US gallon tank, you really don't need to plant all of the stems that come in the pot. In my opinion, that's where I initially went wrong with this, because I just presumed I needed to plant all of them into the aquarium and then it quickly dominated, took all of the nutrients out of the water, and I'd consistently get 0 ppm hits on my test kit for nitrate, so there was no nitrogen source in there, and then everything just starts to melt. Now this is an excellent plant and I love the way it looks and I love how good it is at helping to keep my water parameters safe, but instead of planting all of the stems you get, especially in a nano tank, my advice would be to start with 3 or 4 and adjust as needed. Thankfully, Limnophila sessiliflora is a stem plant, so you can easily trim the excess growth from the top of the stem and plant it into your substrate to get a brand new free plant, and then you can slowly increase and test and adjust that way. In medium to large sized tanks, I really don't think that this will be an issue for most people though, and you can usually just plant all of the stems in there and be fine. Finally, I want to touch on plants that are grown in these little in vitro cups, and with these it's not necessarily the specific plant that's having the issue, it's the method that's used to grow them. This type of plant is cultivated in sterile lab conditions, which means that the company can guarantee that it's free from snail eggs, algae and any other types of pathogens or infections, which is a great advantage for most people. In my personal experience, these are very healthy plants directly out of the cup too, and I've used a lot of them over the years. However, the downside is that these plants seem to be in a slightly weakened state when you first add them to your aquarium because of being grown in sterile conditions. So if you're still cycling your tank after a new setup and your ammonia levels are fluctuating, this can easily be enough to cause these plants to melt in my experience. From what I've seen, they can even be sensitive up to levels of around 0.5 ppm of ammonia, which is very common during an initial cycle. So just like I mentioned with Anubias petite, this is an easy thing to fix. Either do a lot of partial water changes during the cycling phase to keep the plant healthy and ammonia levels down, or if possible, just wait until the tank is fully cycled, ammonia is under control, and then add the plant. And I did get a comment from someone saying, is the plant permanently in this weakened state, when I touched on this in another video last month, and in my experience it's not. Within weeks it hardens up to its natural state and then just starts growing like it normally would. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end, and I hope it's been helpful, and most of these plants really are excellent options, and like I said, I've kept all of them myself. I just wanted to point out a potential downside of them so you can avoid it in your tanks. Thanks for watching the video guys, have a good day and good luck with your planted tanks.